Hi folks, I'm Terry Donnelly and I'm a Sony Europe Imaging Ambassador. Today I'm going to look at the menu system on a Sony A9 Mark II camera and just run through some of the most common things I change on my cameras during setup. Hopefully this will give you a better understanding of the way the menu systems are laid out and help you understand how to set your own camera up just to suit your own needs. It's not going to be an exhaustive look at the menu system, but certainly enough to get your camera set up and up and running. Hope you enjoy the video. Okay folks, so this is the menu system of the Sony A9 Mark II running firmware version 2.0. If you look along the top edge of the menu system, you'll see a series of tabs. Tab 1 is mainly concerned with stills photography, while Tab 2 is mainly concerned with videography. Tab 3 is the network options, Tab 4 is the playback options, Tab 5 is the setup options, and Tab 6 is my menu, and this is where you can make your own customizable menu for your particular camera. So returning to tab number 1, we can look at file format, and this is where you can pick whether you want to shoot in RAW, JPEG or RAW and JPEG. Now depending on the type of shoot you're doing, the conditions you're working in, that will depict on what option you select. The RAW file type, you can have compressed or uncompressed. I've compared both of these options on files and I can't see any difference to my eye. So I am going to always select the compressed option. JPEG quality, I'll always go for the best quality available, which is extra fine. Aspect ratio, normally I will leave this on 3:2, but there will be times when I need to shoot a different format, and that will mainly come down to the clients on their requirements. Looking on the next page of tab 1, the colour space I will select will be sRGB, and again this will only be relevant for when I'm shooting with JPEG. Now that's all I will change on the first 2 pages. Now the next option I will change will be on page 6. The first option on page 6 is the AF illuminator. I always have this switched off. It can be useful in very low light conditions, but I find it to be more of a hindrance and a distraction to people when I'm taking photographs, so that is something I always leave off. The face eye priority and autofocus I always have on. The subject detection, well that will depend on whether I'm photographing humans or animals, so that is something I'll change quite regular. Right left eye select I'll leave as auto. Face iframe display is off. Animal eye display is on. The autofocus tracking sensitivity is something that I'll change depending on the type of sport or the subject what I'm shooting at the time. Having it on number 4 is quite a good setting I find as an overall setting, but sometimes I will push it to be more responsive or to be more sticky. The autofocus with shutter is something that I have switched off. I use my cameras with back button focusing, so I don't want the autofocus to be active on the shutter release of the camera, so that was always switched off. Now moving on to the next page, the only thing I'm going to change in here is the focus frame colour. I prefer to have it set to red as opposed to white because I find it's easier for me to see. Moving on to page 10, the next option I want to set is the exposure step, and I prefer to have that running at further stop intervals. And that is all really I'm going to change on the first tab of options. So now we move to tab 2, which is mainly concerned with video settings, and I'm going to go straight to page number 5. Now here you can select what shutter type you want to use, whether it's electronic or whether it's mechanical, or you can have an automatic setting. Because I mainly shoot sport, I'm going to leave mine on the electronic shutter type. If you use some flash, you'll need it to be in mechanical mode. The next option is release without lens. I always have this enabled. Some of the lenses I use are manual focus lenses and don't have any electronics. So when fitted to the camera is not aware that there's a lens fitted. So if I have this release without lens disabled, the camera will not fire. So I always have that option enabled. Release without a card. Now this means that the camera will fire without a memory card fitted inside the camera. This is extremely dangerous. Please always have this option disabled. If you go out without a card in your camera and you have this option enabled, you could be shooting away for hours and not realise, come back to take the images off your card only to find out there's no card in the camera. So always have this option disabled. So moving on to page number 7, and find the frame rate. I always have the option set to high. Moving on to page number 8, and live view display, setting effect on. With this option, the camera will show me the true exposure value in the electronic viewfinder or on the rear screen of the picture I'm about to take. If I was working in a studio environment where the predominant lighting is going to come from flash, I'd need to change this to set an effect to off. The next option I'm going to look at is the auto review. I always have this switched off. I don't want the camera to play back a picture what I've just taken. It's distracting and it's just not necessary on these modern mirrorless cameras. I've seen the picture before I've taken it. I've seen the exposure value. I've seen the depth of field. I've seen the colour balance. I don't want that to be played back again to me. I just want to carry on shooting. So I always have that switch off. The next option I'm going to look at is the audio signals. I prefer to have all the audio signals switched off on this camera. You do have various options you can use. I prefer the camera to be used totally silent. If you're a new user to Sony cameras, you may want to just have different options. You might want the shutter button to make a sound for you, or you might prefer your camera to beep, particularly if you're coming from a DSLR. But once you get used to the system, it's much more beneficial to have everything switched off, particularly in sport, if you're photographing nature, animals, if you're in any environment where you need to be totally silent, switch all the audio signals off. So the next thing I'm going to move on to is setup number 1. Power save start time. I have this set to 30 minutes, and what that means is the camera is going to switch off if it isn't used, if none of the buttons are pressed. After 30 minutes time, it will go into power save mode. You can customize this right the way down to 10 seconds if you wish, but normally I'll be working with 2 or 3 cameras and I'll be switching back and forth between one camera and another, particularly in sporting environments. So I want the camera to be ready to use the second I press that shutter. So I will always have my cameras on at 30 minutes. For setup number 2, because I'm in the UK, I'm going to make sure that my camera is set up for PAL, which it is. Moving on to page 2 of the setup tab. And this is a new option in firmware version 2.0, anti-dust function. And there's a cleaning mode in there, and there's also an option to have the shutter close when you power off the camera. Now, this is something which a lot of people have been asking for a long time for, and it can be very, very useful. If you're working in a dusty environment and you want to be able to change your lenses and try and keep the sensor clean, it's a good option. But please, whatever you do, do not touch the shutter curtains when they're closed. They're very, very fragile, and you must be really, really careful you do not touch them at all when changing the lens. Normally, in a normal operating environment, I'm going to leave this option switched off. If I am in an environment which, there's a lot of contaminants in the air, I will use this option, but normally I'm just going to leave it as it is. Touch operation, I always have switched off. I'm quite clumsy with the camera. I don't want to be touching the rear screen and changing something on the camera. I'm also a left-eye shooter, which means I rub my nose a lot along the back of the camera. So just for me personally, I prefer to have that switched off. I'm moving on to page 4 of the setup tab. Language, English, you certainly need to, if you do speak English, you need to have that selected. Your date and time setup, you can go in there and change your date, your time, and also the date format. So page number 5 in the setup tab, and you can come in here and look at the copyright information, and you can actually write the copyright information to the file as you take each picture. You can go in and set the photographer, set the copyright holder's name, which I've done here, and you can just display the information there so you can see what information the camera is holding. And this is extremely useful because you can put that information into every single picture you take as you take it in the camera. Write serial number. I've got this switched on, and again the serial number of the camera will be written into the IPTC data of each and every picture that you take. Moving on to page 6 of the setup tab, and in here you can set the file and folder settings. Because I use multiple cameras, I like to name each camera. So this one I've called A9ii, and I want the file number to run in a series. So along the bottom you can see currently the format will run A9ii, which refers to the camera, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 consecutively for each file. It's always worth checking your version as well as you run through here, just to make sure you run on the latest firmware version. And we have a new option which has been introduced in firmware 2.0. You can save and load settings of the camera direct to your SD card to be shared between multiple cameras. This is extremely useful and can save you an awful lot of time. So moving on to the My Menu system, and this is where you can build your own customizable menu. So I put in here the items I use quite regular, such as format, the live view display option, audio signals, file formats, etc. And it's quite simple to do. We just go to the add item, and once we select that, we have 35 pages of items we can add. So if I want to change ISO settings, I can bring that in and I can decide whereabouts on that menu system I want to add it. So that's been added for me. So now it's quite easy for me to come back, and there it is on page 1, and jump straight into the ISO settings. It speeds up your workflow and it makes it much easier to use the camera. These cameras are very customizable. There's a lot of options. Put together your own menu that works exclusively for your own needs. So that's the end of the video, folks. I do hope you've enjoyed it and you found it helpful. So until next time, stay safe and take care.